With the ending of Boruto 2 Blue Vortex's most recent chapter, the anticipated arrival of Kawaki has taken place. However, we do end up learning something quite important in addition to that, and that is that the anticipated 2v1 between Boruto and Kawaki versus Jura is most likely not going to take place. And in fact, something far more interesting is most likely to occur, and that is a three-way battle between Momoshiki, Jura, and Kawaki himself. And the reason why I say that that's the most likely scenario, if we are to see Boruto make an appearance in this battle, is due to the way the fight ended. Upon looking at the leaks at first, we believed that Boruto was still in the state in which he could fight alongside Kawaki. But with the wording that we do end up getting, and the facts that are presented to us after closer inspection, we can clearly see that that cannot happen, or at least for the moment Boruto has not rejuvenated enough in which he can fight alongside Kawaki. Maybe we do end up learning something that is interesting regarding the Otsutsuki's regenerative abilities, in which Boruto, after given a bit of time to rest while Kawaki is fighting versus Jura, due to his Otsutsuki's genetics, he is able to come back and fight alongside Kawaki. In the fight versus Boruto and Jura, there were multiple occasions in which Jura mentions Boruto's Otsutsuki durability, saying that he expected as much from an Otsutsuki after Boruto was able to fight for so long against Jura, where Boruto was able to fight for so long versus Jura and not be heavily injured. Jura, who is not going all out at all, still ends up praising Boruto's durability, so maybe he does end up coming back. However, with the information presented, it is most likely not going to be the case. Thus, due to the fact that we have a Kawaki who literally tells Boruto to just focus on making sure that his karma doesn't go out of control while he battles versus Jura, it does end up going with the interpretation that Boruto will not be fighting versus Jura just yet, and we'll end up seeing Kawaki fight versus Jura for a good portion of that chapter. However, what I believe to be a cliffhanger for the following chapter is Boruto joining the fight. However, Boruto will not join the fight as Boruto himself, but he will join as Momoshiki, as I believe that this is the most likely scenario to take place, which will end up leading to one of the futures that Kashin Koji ended up envisioning, a future where we ultimately see Jura retreating, with blood on his mouth, as that is what we saw. It may not actually be blood, maybe something completely different, or it is one of the possible futures that could take place. However, I do believe that what Kashin Koji is seeing, due to the point where we're at in this fight, is most likely going to be the current interpretation, as none of them have been told about this new updated future from Kashin Koji, thus they may not be able to make moves that will potentially change it, due to the fact that they are not aware of what is taking place. This then leads me to believe that Boruto either ends up fighting along Kawaki for a bit, and then as they are fighting, it is even harder for him to keep his karma under control, which ends up leading to Boruto using his karma in this fight as it ends up resonating, giving us potentially a time crunch in which Boruto is able to use the karma without Momoshiki taking over. We did end up getting multiple statements in the past that Boruto, when using the karma, feels like he is dying and feels like he is being pushed to the corner of his psyche, which does end up giving us more credence to the fact that we could have Boruto use the karma for a bit and have a specific time limit or an amount of time in which he's capable of using the karma without allowing Momoshiki to come into play. And that would be pretty interesting to examine, as it would be giving us Boruto using the karma and specific set of rules that Boruto can use the karma for, and then Momoshiki would take over. So we get to see Boruto using the karma, but we do know the risk that Boruto would be taking. And the way I believe we could see this happen is as follows. First of all, talking about Kawaki versus Jura, whether you believe that Kawaki is stronger than base Boruto or simply relative, whatever you believe in, we can clearly admit that Kawaki has an edge when it comes to his fighting style versus the likes of Jura, simply due to the fact that most of his strongest abilities are not necessarily ninjutsu based, are not necessarily going to be countered by Jura, and this is due to the fact that one, Kawaki doesn't have a Rasengan that can be countered by Jura. Due to the Rasengan being similar to Jura's, we know that that won't be the case, as Kawaki doesn't use abilities that are derived from the Rasengan. So when we do end up talking about Kawaki using his Kokugan, as he didn't really use his Kokugan yet in this battle, as he could have shrunk the Tail Beast bomb that Jura ended up using. Thus, we clearly know that he is not using the Kokugan yet, and is his dojutsu that he will eventually end up using. So while tapping into version 2 Karma, or simply the Karma as we saw it just yet, we could see Kawaki use the Kokugan and start spawning these gigantic cubes just like Ishiki did in the fight versus Boruto and Sasuke, and just like he did in his fight versus Boruto in chapter 78. And as he starts to spam this, we do know that it ends up interfering with characters' sensory abilities, which was one of the abilities that Naruto did end up noting from these gigantic cubes. With Baryon mode like powers, we have characters like Naruto that were able to resist it and even push away some of those blocks when they were falling upon him. Maybe we do see a difference in scale and the powers of those cubes when it ends up being used versus Jura, due to the simple fact that Kawaki will end up being shown to be stronger than Ishiki, due to the fact that Kawaki already has his base power without the karma, and then we're adding on top of that an amplification due to Ishiki's experience and Ishiki's powers. Thus we could end up seeing an even greater power being shown throughout Kawaki, and it is not just Ishiki's powers, but it's Ishiki's powers and his own, which will likely make him stronger than Ishiki himself during this battle. But due to that simple fact, maybe all of his abilities end up being amped up, or simply due to the fact that they are cubes, the cubes still end up remaining at their base weight, so they still have a base amount of damage that they can do, regardless of the person who is using it. There are multiple different interpretations that we could go with, but simply noting the fact that Jura is most likely going to be stronger than Kawaki, who at least using the karma is stronger than Boruto. I believe that Jura is going to be pushed, the closest we have ever seen to him actually tapping in to his true power. And thus, during that fight at the climax like we usually see, or when things are starting to get really interesting for Kawaki, or particularly for Jura when it comes to defeating Kawaki himself, it is at that moment that I do believe that we will see either one or two things. Either Boruto will stop trying to resist the karma and join the fight himself, and then we will truly see Boruto and Kawaki's karma resonating, which could potentially allow Boruto to use the karma for a period of time and not have to deal with Momoshiki coming out immediately. Or we could have Boruto, who is still struggling to control his karma, and then it gets to a simple point where Momoshiki is now able to take over and reap Rampage. If the three-way fight between Kawaki, Jura, and Momoshiki is now to take place, now things will truly get interesting. Not only will we get cool dialogue between Jura and Momoshiki, but what's going to be also quite interesting is the fact that yet again, Kawaki has been proven that he can't trust and depend on Boruto, even after all this time. One could say that Kawaki could have a change in mind in regards to Boruto, due to the fact that in the time skip, he is able to control Momoshiki's powers, and thus we could potentially see Boruto and Kawaki go back to being cool with each other. However, this is not the case, due to the fact that Boruto cannot control his karma. So it being made clear that Boruto at this current level is still not able to control his karma at all, it just brings further credence to Kawaki's beliefs, as Boruto is using the karma, and yet again, Boruto is a threat. And Boruto himself could be aware of it, which is one of the reasons why he does end up making sure that everybody is out of the way when it comes to this fight, as his last resort is to end up using the karma if it is not effective against Momoshiki. Or we could see a Momoshiki in defiance, a Momoshiki who perhaps doesn't want to fight against Jura, and Momoshiki who doesn't end up helping Boruto at all, and like we saw in the fight versus Code, a Momoshiki who goes and targets Kawaki. That would be something even more interesting in the fact that we would have a similar situation to a traumatic moment for Kawaki that ended up resulting in the ideology that he has now, that results in him being more Ishiki-like. That Code fight where Momoshiki and Code ended up teaming up, almost resulting in the death of Naruto. It could be a similar situation that ends up happening But simply due to the things that we end up seeing, one thing that we have to note is that Jura doesn't end up dying, and Jura ends up at least sustaining an injury in which he has to go back to his dimension where there is the divine tree, and I believe that that is the end of that fight. So there are a number of ways that I can see that taking place, and drawing towards one specific conclusion might be a little bit harder for us to do. But one thing that we have to keep in note is what exactly is Momoshiki trying to achieve. And by seeing what Momoshiki is trying to achieve, we can then come to understand what exactly Momoshiki will do at this given time. With the divine trees, Momoshiki, who is inside of Boruto's body, most likely knows everything, as we even know that Momoshiki knew Amado's name. So a Momoshiki who is silenced, most likely due to the fact that he has seen a future in which he has the upper hand, and doesn't want Boruto to know about it at all, due to the fact that we know that their minds are merging, and whenever Momoshiki thinks something, Boruto is also able to understand and intercept those thoughts and hear them in his own mind. We do know that it is quite dangerous for Momoshiki to be thinking throughout the time skip, as just like what happened before, Boruto will see that same future and will work to counteract it, which is why Boruto is still able to have his body under control, as the plan that Momoshiki had obviously ended up failing. So this time with a Momoshiki who is learning from his mistakes, it is quite likely that he has formulated a plan and won't be simply wasting his appearances to just save Boruto or to get revenge on somebody like Sasuke when it came to his Rinnegan. So if Momoshiki is to make a move, it would mean that that move is a step towards his goal. A step towards a goal of either controlling Boruto's body or coming back to life himself. Meaning that we could either see Momoshiki attempt to make Boruto despair even more and take over his body, or Momoshiki has understood that he can't make Boruto despair. Thus his only option is for him to find a new vessel in which he can come back in. That vessel could ultimately end up being the Senju, and that Senju, who is the strongest, is Jura, which would be quite interesting to see how that would make a move, where we ultimately have Jura, who is implanted with a karma that is from Boruto / Momoshiki that allows Momoshiki to later on take over in Boruto's body. However, one thing I do want to note is that there has to be a big moment that causes both sides to retreat in some way, shape, or form, which would ultimately either be a big injury from Jura or a big injury from Kawaki or Boruto. A lot of people like to mention that Kawaki is a glass cannon now, due to the fact that his defensive amps have been switched offensively, but the one thing that we have to note here is what exactly is being said. When Amado is referring to Kawaki's defensive abilities, he's referring to his ability to regenerate from attacks. And we do know that he made it so that no matter what Code did, Kawaki would basically be immortal to a Code level threat, so it's most likely simply talking about his regenerative abilities that would allow him to withstand multiple different types of attacks, in the sense that it is not his actual durability that has been changed, but his ability to come back from heavy blows. Thus, we could still expect that Kawaki has higher durability now, due to his offensive staff being boosted, meaning that his general chakra throughout his body is stronger and more intense, meaning that his durability is better. However, his ability to regenerate from crazy attacks is obviously not at the level it was before. So if Kawaki gets his arm blown off, it won't regenerate in that sense, like attacks that we have seen characters in Kara like Boro be hit with and generate new limbs, but he will most likely have to go back to Amado's location where he ends up having his arm put back in place. That's how I personally view Kawaki's durability, but all of that does end up telling me that the fight between Jura and Kawaki will most likely end up being intercepted or third-partied by somebody like Boruto, and Boruto would not be in an aiding position to Kawaki, but would be one where he is also a threat to both Kawaki and Jura, making this fight even more interesting. But Momoshiki appearing all has to do with his goals and the powers that he has. So if you want to figure out more about Momoshiki and what he may be trying to achieve with his power, watch this video right here.